Welcome to Men, Sex, and Tantra.
Discover what your parents, porn, and religion never taught you about being a man and having extraordinary sex. Get ready to have your mind blown and your world rocked. And we're back, and I still have Darshan with me. And you saw me cut him off there in that last episode where he was saying, "But men, blah," and I cut him off because I knew he was onto something that we probably wanted to talk about. So in the quick break that we had, I said, "What was the rest of that?" And he said, "You don't understand. Men are clueless." So let's talk about why men are clueless, Darshan. Where were you going with that? What's happening?
Well, as kids, we learn not by what we're told, we learn by what we see. This is universal. Animals, you learn, you do what your parents do or your caregivers do, and you emulate or you try and replicate that. So personally, my dad was a Harvard PhD, Phi Beta Kappa psychologist. He was A-list. He was so smart, but he didn't know how to feel. He didn't know how to listen. And he wasn't comfortable with the pain that he experienced growing up, as we all do. It's a tough go, just making it 10 years old. So as men, and this is an evolutionary kind of an overview, the generations nowadays are a whole lot different than our parents. Goes without saying, our grandparents. They were tough. You had to be tough. You didn't survive unless you were tough. You didn't conquer nations and, do all the shit that men have had to do or men have done throughout recorded history. If you felt feelings, it would be impossible. It's really tough to take someone else's life and not have it ruin your own. So out of necessity, we've had to cut off from our feelings in order to kick ass and conquer other people, right?
Yeah.
Right. So what I experienced in my training is that I knew if I felt one teeny bit of feeling, it would open up the door to the warehouses of repressed emotion that would avalanche me and absolutely destroy me. If I felt one little itty bitty feeling, it would be cracking open the door. So I didn't. I didn't want to feel, because it would mean feeling all the feelings that I'd never felt, that intuitively I knew was stuffed back there in Shadowland. And shadow isn't evil stuff. It's just the stuff that we haven't been able to deal with. And as kids growing up, parents, adults, life, the stuff that happens to us that out of necessity, not having the tool set, we have to splinter off. And this is a psychological mandate. In order to survive, we've had to disassociate from the parts of us that experience pain or trauma or abuse. And we slide it behind us, so to say. But it never goes away. It festers, it ferments, it blows up in times of our lives that's impossible to deal with because we have no training, we have no guides or mentors. And there's a great line, own your shadow or it will own you. And most people I know, varying degrees, Tanya, haven't dealt with their repressed emotions, their feelings of unfulfillment. I was raised with a core belief that I wasn't lovable. And I was broken. And this is another basic in the whole dynamic of energy consciousness, is that we live our lives from our belief systems, our core beliefs, our subconscious beliefs. And most of us, at least in my experience, is that none of us really felt that we were worth love or worth loving or had value. And maybe that's obviously a general statement. So guys,
I think it's pretty basic. Value beyond what you were producing as a man, especially.
Right. So I grew up from a family that literally the belief was if you don't work, you don't eat. My father's father was a builder contractor back in Orange County back in the turn of the century, who was tougher than tough. He drove a Model T across the country with his wife to DeKalb County, Georgia. He had to quit school at 8 years old to make a nickel a day picking cotton, sun up to sundown. This motherfucker was just tough. And he could build, my grandfather, he could build a house from the basement to the roof and do everything. He was just, this is how you had to be back then. Right?
Yep.
So my father inherited that work ethic out of his desire to survive that. My grandfather was a pre-fundamentalist Baptist preacher.
Wow.
And fundamentalists, anything, are just tough. So my father became a psychologist to break out of that mold, but he taught his kids, my father taught his 3 sons, of which I'm the youngest of 3, how to paint houses, how to do plumbing, how to do electrical, how to do stuff. And my father worked angry. And he had a workshop in the basement, and every fucking Saturday morning we'd hear that skill saw going off at 8:30, and we just looked at each other, my 2 brothers and I, like, oh man. We had to be downstairs within 10 minutes to help my dad do what he was wanting to do. That was his therapy. So I love work ethic. I love discipline. But I also know that as the masculine has that drive, that purposefulness, that strength, in order to be whole, in order to be happy, we also have to empower the other part of our nature, which is the feminine. Not effeminate. I'm hetero to the core, but I have a very strong feminine quality. I'm intuitive, I'm receptive. When we were talking in our last segment, Tanya, you said, oh, stop, right? At the end, I stopped. I'm not going to talk over you. I don't need, even though you're giving me a break here, and it's not about my way, it's about our way.
Yeah.
About moving from me to we. That's the sacred. That's the conscious. It's what works for all of us, not just my needs or wants or spiel. So men have got we're in the low end of the consciousness spectrum in that, not less than women, but women, the feminine rather, is the awakening wave on the planet. Not women necessarily, but the feminine is, you're one of them, Tanya. You live a life that is so vastly different than your mother or grandmother. You're a way shower. You're a powerhouse. Right?
Yeah, I use a lot of my masculine energy to get there, though.
And it's about using both.
That's it. Exactly. See, that's what my whole thing is. It's like we're capable of both for a reason. If we weren't capable of both, we wouldn't have access to both. And so in my world, it's all about how do I fully potentialize. That's what my life's all about. Right. Fully potentializing as a human in my meat sack means that if it's available to me, then I'm going to be maximizing it. And so when I look at, I've always adored men. I was a daddy's girl, even though my father was a cowardly liar, as it turns out. When I was young, I adored him, and I thought, everything, the moon walked and everything rose with him. A powerhouse man, he definitely was. I wanted to emulate everything about him. Walk fast, be powerful, show up dynamic in a room, take no prisoners. I was definitely that. But there were some awful sides of that. He had never worked through his horrible raising and the depression stuff. He had never worked through his guilt or things that he had done in the war that affected him. He would lie to us to get us to do things. He believed that manipulation was the way to get things to happen. And so there's a lot of really nasty traits there that I actually didn't want to emulate. So that was pretty cool, but could have, because I was watching him do it. But what I realized in the end was that he didn't know how to connect in a real way. My mother was a phenomenal person, and I never gave her enough credit for the truly outstanding Renaissance woman that she was. And I would see her talk about being lonely, even though they loved each other immensely. You could tell that she didn't get the connection that she really needed. But she also told me that she understood he didn't have that availability. Like, he didn't know you said the most potent thing, I think,
Wow.
at the beginning was that he felt just like I was thinking about my ex who said, if I open that crack to love you as fully as I want to love you, it means I'll feel all of the tragedy
Right.
that happened to the loves before me that I haven't dealt with.
Right.
A pretty darn profound statement. I think a lot of men know, if they take the moment to think about it, that they are repressing. They are not only programmed to do that, but then consciously doing it when opportunity opens, because how will they survive? How can they do and feel at the same time?
And we're comprised of both mental and emotional, male or masculine and feminine. That's part of the infrastructure of our human psyche, is we have both. I didn't say that. Shakespeare said that. We're all on somewhere on the spectrum. Some people are more on one or the other. But unless being a whole soul, being whole, which of course is where holistic comes from, is that both apparently opposite sides are in fact complementary when we've engaged them both. And engaging takes practice, it takes training, it takes a skill set, it takes tools. I'm a practical guy. I need tools. That's why I work out. I love discipline. I love doing the things that make me feel good about myself, good about my life. But most guys weren't provided with tools. Simple, like follow your breath in with what you want, follow your breath out, release what you don't want. Simple things that I've found in my life, Tanya, are mainstay practices that increase the comfort in my life and decrease the suffering in my life. That's it. But my guys don't, we up until now, and that's a great qualifier, up until now, men haven't had other men, and I'm not special. Special being better than. I'm unique. I'm uniquely unique. We're all uniquely unique to whatever degree. But I've, for whatever reason, have focused on developing my uniqueness as a man to increase my comfort and my joy and my ability to deal with disappointment, have healed hardcore addictions, hardcore anger, hardcore heartbreak, and have learned tools to do that. And the work I do is about providing those simple tools. You got to do them, just like anything, in order to release the shit to increase the joy. That's the whole point.
So the question I want to ask about that is, when you realized, so raised, you gave us the background, raised, you suppressed the feelings, didn't want to face the feelings, couldn't figure out how, like, what was the linchpin when you just couldn't live in that space anymore? What happened that you finally, like, even if you thought you might die if you started feeling things, what was the catalyst?
I knew I didn't have a choice, because going back is like climbing back into the, the mouth of the lion. I just had to keep going forward. And for whatever reason, I've had a real strong tenaciousness to keep going forward in my life. On some level, and I have absolutely been suicidal. It's not that I wanted to die, I just didn't want to be myself anymore.
Mm.
And over the course of the past 23 years, I've had 3 quote unquote existential meltdowns where I was in a fetal position, and these are 6 years apart. It all lasted for 18 months, where my life just blew up, and I was absolutely alone and sucking air. I lost weight, I stopped working out, I stopped praying, I stopped doing everything good for myself because I gave up. I didn't feel I was worth not just loving, but having a life that was enjoyable. And the only way out is through. You've got to go through the eye of the needle to get out the other side. And to get through the eye of the needle, you got to leave something on the other. You got to leave something behind you. Fear, resentment, judgment, all about ourselves. And I had an inner critic the size of fucking Godzilla on crack. Got from my dad. I made myself wrong for feeling good, for feeling bad, for feeling anything. And the thing is that as we do our healing, this is getting a little metaphysical, our healings send back a wave like a domino that actually free up our ancestry. But we got to start with ourselves first. We've got to forgive. We've got to come to a place where we're not blaming ourselves and thereby stop doing the stuff that we blamed ourselves for too. It's not just forgiving the fact that, I do a gram a night. I mean, I party really hard. I had to stop doing that.
You still have a nose, though. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah, but it's paid a price. So it's just about increasing the good and decreasing the feeling of suffering. That's really any spiritual path is about increasing what feels good or what is good or fulfilling or joyful by releasing the need to suffer. And there is a need to suffer. I wasn't violent, thank God. I've always had a great heart, caring heart, but I was very self-destructive.
Which is violent to yourself.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And my fucked up belief was to get God's love, I had to punish myself to be worthy, which is really, really a terrible, terrible strategy. It's like people who beat themselves or
flagellate. Yeah.
That's boy, that doesn't increase anything good other than scarring and more pain.
Right.
And as humans, water runs downstream, just like abuse, just like addiction. It runs through the familial line. We learn to do what we see our parents do.
Yeah.
We love as an adult as we were loved as children until we do a lot of work to unwind.
Say that line again. We're loved as?
We love as adults as we were loved as children.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty potent line. And if you, I mean, we're all, and the guys who listen to this program know, we're all programmed. I mean, our entire mindset, and it was purposeful at a time when we only had to program like, don't eat the red berries, don't go by caves that look like that, and the water's found down there. That's why those programs are laid in so hard, because they were about survival. Well, the reality is we are drastically in 200 years, our lives have changed and we have not evolutionarily caught up with what's going on now. So now those same skills that were incredibly important can now be important and be incredibly destructive. And so we're so far out of sync with nature and what we should naturally be doing. So for me, when I adore men, I absolutely adore men. And I say this on almost all the time, that most men get a unfair shake of things because you're expected to know everything. You're expected to provide. You're expected to protect. You're expected to know everything about what turns somebody on. You're expected to be a fabulous father. The expectations of what you're supposed to do are just freaking enormous. And given that, you're very rarely taught the tools, because then you have social media telling you about the whole stupid polarity thing in a bad way. Like, you need to man up and tell her where you're taking her on that adventure of her life. This is why I don't like some of this stuff, is just insane. It's even more pressure. And so I would like to think that when you come on this show, that you hear real things from real men. You hear things from me that tell you there are women there that adore the masculine, that adore men, that get what's happening and want to give you some ways to start moving out of this. And I want to tell any women, that women listen to this show too, Women, we talk about all the time how we want our men to be more emotional, to be more vulnerable, to be more intimate. And then yet when they are, most of us crucify them, emasculate them, and take them down. We do not provide a safe place for that to happen. And so I think, and I call women out at workshops on this a lot, if we want men to be, who are programmed to stay the course, men are not really programmed to change very easily. If we want men to actually make those changes, we need to be a source of inspiration and safety, not nagging and danger.
Well, you got to do your part too.
Of course, right. But, and that said, here's my big caveat. Safety is an inside job. We can only trust people until we can't. People are trustworthy till they're not. People are safe till they're not. But if we create practices that build our own self-safety and our own self-trust, we can actually weather these big things and changes that we need to make. So what would you consider, if you agree with that, Darshan?
Well,
a self-trust, something that men could learn to build that ability so they could start to weather that big feeling storm that they need to open up.
okay, so this is a segue back to something you said about your dad. He manipulated you, lied to you. And this is a basic truth, like the sun is hot and water is wet. We talk to others the way we talk to ourselves, right? And if I'm in conflict with myself, if I'm on the battlefield in myself, I'm going to create a life where I'm externalizing that battlefield. I'm going to create the suffering that I feel in myself, not good enough, I'm not worthy, I'm an asshole, whatever. I'm going to project that into my relationships, into my world. I'm going to treat other people the way I treat myself. So that inside job piece was really, really insightful, that we have to learn to listen to the voices that talk inside of our heads. And most of the voices are talking shit to us that we believe is truth, but it is not the truth. We're not our parents. We're not our fathers or our mothers. That we have a choice to make that is our sovereign right. And again, is what do we want to feel about ourselves? That simple practice of breathing in what you want and breathing out what you don't want. Of being attentive first and foremost to what it is that we do think about ourselves. What do we feel about ourselves? Is that what we really want to feel? Because when you were talking about programming, we're talking about being conditioned response that become our belief systems that are formed by the time we're 5 years old, 5 or 6. What's right, what's wrong. Kids don't grow up hating another person because they got a different color. It's our parents that tell us that that color isn't good or that, so it's really taking over the reins of our own consciousness, Tanya, and being the man we want to be, not the man that we were raised to be or that society wants us to be. It's like getting our head out of our ass or out of the dirt and asking, what do I want my life to be about? This isn't just men, it's women as well. And women are as conditioned about the broken masculine as men are about the broken masculine, as men are about the abusive feminine. We've got to get to a core place in ourselves, which is about being present, where we ask, what is it that, what am I here for? What do I want in my life? We're all going to have regrets to some level, but you want to have as few regrets as possible when you hit that turning point, when you pass over the magic rainbow and die. You want to feel a sense of fulfillment, a sense of self-worth, like your time was worth it being alive. That each day, as we have that mini death of going to sleep, that you're not racked with disappointment, that you've got some good things to feel about when you go to bedtime. That you live purposefully from what fulfills us. And it takes being aware. That's a big word right there, being conscious, being present. It's not spiritual, it's about being alive in our bodies as our bodies are alive, which is the present moment. So
is that a good question to journal about? What do I want in my life? Or what's your
yeah.
giveaway? What's your giveaway to the guys? What do you want them to do?
What are you here for? What are you here for? Not what your parents want you, not what your wife, not what your kids. What are you here for? You got to find your direction, man. You got to find a reason why you're alive, and not dissect it or analyze it, but to distill it down. And journaling is a great way of tapping into the deeper parts of our nature. You're so right about that.
Okay.
What do you want your life to be about, bro? That's
Write
yeah.
it down like that with the bro part too. What do you want your life to be about, bro? Get it?
For yourself.
Yeah.
What are your values? Your beliefs will change, but you got to find core values.
Yeah. Now that is one of the things, and I'll get behind that. So I will second the values. That's an exercise that I do with everybody, which is let's define your top 6 values, and not to be confused with what you value, which is what most people write down first.
Right.
But your values are your ethical compass. It's your North Star that you use when you're making decisions, when you're evaluating things, when you're figuring stuff out. And most of us our values are programmed by our parents. So I think I love this idea of get out a journal, ask yourself these questions. What do you want in your life? What am I doing? And what are my values? Can you, if one of my values was instilled in me, that basically, if I followed my dad's footsteps, it would be he who has the money holds the power. Now, as the woman who's always made more money than any man I've been with, I was very cognizant of that program because I hated it so much how my dad used it, that I was very much like, hey, I'm not ever going to use that way. So one of my values, of course, was equality in my partnerships. So think about that, guys. Grab a journal. I mean, maybe some of you have not ever written before. You're like, isn't that journaling for girls? Whatever it is you're doing. No, journaling is totally hip for everybody. You don't have to use the Princess Pink diary with the little lock on it unless that floats your boat. You can totally use that. They make like super manly, like, animal hide.
On bark.
Right. Yeah, shit like that. Bark journals. Right. Yeah, bark journals and dirty stuff and animal hide. Yeah, you can totally get your masculine journal on. And but go ahead, and you can even write bro. You can write whatever you want in that thing. But go ahead and practice and try that. And we're going to wrap this up on leaving you guys with that. And another, I think, compelling episode to look deeper into these things that we're looking at. Like we started with men are clueless. Now we're telling you, don't be clueless, because what you want to do is actually get to know yourself. Grab that journal, write down some questions, ask yourself some questions, spend 5 minutes or 10 minutes a day actually doing that. Science, by the way, proves out that this works. Just in case you're wondering, you can go look it up. But we will be back for another episode.
Super.
And we're out.